on the benefits and the importance of inheritance as a Muslim. We ought to take into consideration from the past sessions that we had, the importance that was done and reflect on those points that were mentioned at the very beginning of our class until this present time, that we looked at quite a number of things in relationship towards preparation of our will. And we also looked at the importance of connecting ourselves and getting ourselves geared towards having our will done as soon as possible, or prepared in anticipation of whatever may be the outcome of our existence as human beings, as Muslims in particular. Now, we looked at all the different factors, for example, what will make our will valid, what will cause the will to go void, and we looked at the will in respect to what the Quran tells us. And we know that the Quran, subhanAllah, mentions in a number of places in the Quran, and I just want you to bear in mind, maybe you could jot it in your notes somewhere, that the word and inheritance is mentioned in the Quran in 8 different verses, in 8 different areas in the Quran. So bearing that in mind, we should know that when we are speaking about the Quran and in reference towards a will or the preparation of a will or having a will or the incumbent nature of a will, in other words, the Quran is telling us that it is obligatory upon us that we should have a will. In the next verse of the Quran, it tells us that when we are preparing a will, we should have 2 witnesses. In another verse, it mentions that whilst we are on journey, and if we were to come in a situation where we do not have a will, then we should call 2 persons, trustworthy persons, and give them an indication of what we want to distribute towards our family. Such are the importance that one must bear in relationship to preparation of a will. And then we also looked at the areas in relationship towards the will when we looked at the regulations in our last session from an law of the land point of view and even from an Islamic point of view. And we should ask ourselves a very important questions when it comes to this, because we should consider that in the preparation of our will, that the laws of the land and the laws of Islam, especially if we live in a Western society, that we may not have the exact type of congruency between the laws of the land as opposed to the laws in relationship to the state. So therefore, when we look at the laws of the land and the laws that the Quran tells us, there's 2 distinct things. One tells us that we have an incumbent relationship between ourselves and our Lord in the preparation of our will. Whereas in the laws of the land, it dictates to us that if you, an individual, have not prepared a will, then a will be done according to the estate and the laws of the land that you live in. And that could amount to a number of things taking effect. One, for example, you can prepare a will, and that will can have some level of effect where you can benefit out of it in terms of your children. The obligation towards them, the right towards them is fulfilled from an Islamic perspective, that we ought to leave out, as the Quran tells us, that which is the residue and not the 1/3 portion that we are allowed to take care of in relationship towards the things that will benefit us from sadaqatun jariyah, meaning we spend on those institutions as Islamic institutions that will benefit us, the masjid, the poor and needy, amongst them, people who are studying deen, and so forth. We try to help out in situations with the wealth that we have from the 1/3 that we are allowed to leave as an estate, or part of our estate. And the residue, the remaining portion, goes towards the will that the Quran describes in terms of the shares who are entitled to receive. So we looked at those things, and we should ask ourselves, in the absence of an Islamic will not being prepared by us, then what will be the condition of us and our wealth? In the absence of it, what will happen? We said that 2 things will happen. One, that for the starters, you will have to go now to the state laws, unless the children themselves come together and out of khair and goodness decide that, our father or mother or or brother or sister, whoever it may be, or their children, advise or give some level of kindness towards that individual who have now termed the deceased, and try to assist that individual in getting off that case by actually helping in preparing that will. And that is something that is, not by saying, well, that will, meaning that the wanted portion will definitely be out, because you cannot determine what that wanted portion would have been, or what that person would have desired to have in that wanted, that is the wasiya. However, the children of that deceased and the 6 persons we have mentioned in the last class, I hope you can remember those 6 people. We said that they are entitled to receive from the Quranic perspective. And if you could recall them, their names, the individuals are who? The father, the mother, wife, husband, daughter, and sons, who are the residue. These are amongst the first preferential set of individuals. These 6 are amongst the preferential individuals who will receive out of the estate of that individual who have died. So in such a circumstance, we consider what will be done if a will was not there. And therefore, which way or what can be done is that we know from an automatic perspective, once an individual is a Muslim, then it is advisable by any learned scholar or an institution that deals with these level of estates from an Islamic perspective, or from the imam in your community. Maybe that individual may be equipped enough to handle such a matter, and therefore we seek the guidance from these individuals to ensure that a will now is prepared according to Islamic law, which is already dictated by the Quran as to what should be done. And so therefore an individual will say, well, the Quran already tells us what to do. Well, the Quran tells us what to do in relationship if there is no wasiyah, no wanted portion prepared, then everything will go into estate, meaning that an individual, for example, or for instance, if that individual has with him or her no prior will, then whatever wasiyah was to be given or have by way of word or mouth will not be considered, except that it was done in the presence of witnesses. So a person cannot come to an individual family now after they died and say, well, your father promised he will help fix the wall in the masjid, or he will paint over the masjid, or he will do this, or he will do that, or he would have spent some money in the school, or other types of statements like these. These will not be held as legible and valid in the wasiyah, in the will of that individual, because you need to have it in writing with witnesses bearing testimony to that wasiyah, that will. And if that is not done, then the basic procedures will carry about, where we know that the expenses that are to be deducted from the estate of the individual who has died would be the funeral expenses. And we talk about the basic funeral expenses. We're not talking about the additional things that we decorate the funerals with, meaning, for example, having food and drinks and all different types of things, and probably carrying on some additional type of activities for a number of days, and trying to take out all of this money from the person who had died. These are not part of the will. So it cannot be added to the will as such. Now, in consideration of that, we should also bear in mind that we look at the will and we look at the consideration of a person whom, for instance, did not prepare a will, and we mentioned that it will go according to Islamic law, and no wasiyah will be considered. And we deduct from that particular situation, we deduct all that is bearing on individual from debts and also loans and whatever it may be. However, there may be a condition as well in that situation where an individual, for instance, he may have money being owed by people to him or her, as the case would be, and that individual now tries to be left out as a person that has died. So what happens to that individual now who owes that individual? Two things happen. And one of them is that the individuals who are owing, they must come forward and provide that which was owed to this individual and give it to the family in order it can be considered to be part of the will. Another area that must be considered is that of the presence of any type of documents that may have been probably left, even though the person may not have a will, but he have probably left some type of paper or an agreement somewhere in the house that might be known, or might put it in some kind of drawer, or may have probably prepared this by some lawyer or something like that. It is a businessman, he have some type of business running, all of these things, and he had no will, then it goes according to this plan. So all of these things are part of our consideration. Now, this evening, we want to pay more particular attention to an aspect in our notes that is very important for us to look at, and that is we look at the benefits of the females, sisters, and their right to inheritance. So from our Islamic perspective, females' rights to inheritance. Now, this is something that is not unique in Islam, because Islam had given rights to women to benefit, and they have a right to own, and they have a right to do any aspect of trade and transaction and businesses. And bearing that in mind, we must note of some of the significant changes in the world when it comes to women's rights to property. And for example, I've put this post here, and this is very important to note, that in Muslim women's right to property in India is a challenge for them, as all other women in India, right? Now, why would mention this first? Because there are a number of factors we must look at in the history of women and their right towards wealth, okay? The history that tells us of women and their right towards wealth. Now, in India, up to the present 2005, women were debarred from having actual inheritance earned to them from their relative, be it their father, physical estate, and whatever property that they may have. They were debarred from this by the law, and only in the parliament they have recently, in 2005, given allowance to the women to actually have rights to earn. Otherwise, everything was handed over towards an elder brother or some other persons, and even her own children would have more preference. Her male children will have more preference towards inheritance rather than her or her daughters. This was the way, or the practices up to the year 2005 in India. And some of the Muslim sisters of India who are there, even though that the laws of Islam governs the right that you should give your children in your personal capacity. Some of the men, because of the living in a situation or in an environment as such, they put themselves to try to outsmart their daughters in that particular environment of India to relieve them of actually earning and having wealth. And this is not a practice of Islam, but this is a practice of the culture of the people of India towards women. Islam have long gone in the presence of the world as the leaders to actually give preference to women. Now, if you go to history and the past history with amongst religions of the past, for example, amongst the Jews and the Christians, what was their principle and the philosophy of inheritance according to the laws that were presented there? In that time, the woman property was handed over to their husbands. In other words, if they were given anything as gift or wealth from their parents in that time or that era, under the law at that time, it was handed over to their husband in care and in guidance and in use of whatever may be more beneficial. Now, sometimes it looks as though, when you see something like this, you tell yourself, well, I wonder if it is that a woman cannot make a financial decision on her own. That is far from our Islam. But however, in other societies, women were not seen to be like this. And even in our modern day society today, even though women today, the laws have changed because governments and secular systems and secularism has shown that women have moved into society and into businesses and into positions in government businesses and on structures in the ministries and whatever have you, and even in ministerial positions and leadership positions in the world, they have actually put places and laws that will actually allow women to have this level of right to ownership, which is of a benefit to them, even though Islam have already established this based on the distinct measures and regulations set in the Quran, and that which Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam has spoken about. But in our society today, even in our Western society, as modern it is today, still women are still not given that level of equal treatment, even though we talk equality. Yes, by the laws of the land, that had to be demanded that women who have to actually reach in position like this and still slave themselves in society, work hard, and even in this circumstance, they still face the challenge when it comes to having wealth that they can own and it belongs to them, and how they should spend it. And even in our modern society, like what we're living in today, when husband and wife works and they contribute an income towards a family, then what is really the situation for the position of demise of the wife or the husband? In this case, the husband and the wife have to inherit. What does this society tell us? In fact, we know that in such cases, women are given the full right to the wealth and the property based on certain principles along with the children. This is how normally most states have it in the share and distribution of the property. And they may get equal shares. Now, that being said, is well within the state and the rights that they choose to give women the level of right and privileges. However, from my Islamic perspective, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the creator of all of us, also have given us an opportunity as well and a guideline as how we should live and how we should actually prepare our will. So that is not something that is taken by chance, but it's something that is given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and dictated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us to actually distribute according to the laws of Allah. Rather than what the state is saying, maybe I would say that whether there is level of a benefit or not a benefit, the fact is that is according to what we think and not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained. And therefore, not that a woman should be deprived, and Islam have never deprived her of that right. But from an Islamic perspective, as opposed to the state and the rights that the state gives to a woman, especially a Muslim woman, has to comply to the laws of Allah and be guided by it, because there are many cases in our society, there are Muslim sisters whom are not satisfied with what the Quran describes and gives as the injunction towards what is necessary to be distributed towards her as her right. And sometimes they take the matter to court so that they can have full access towards this right. And I could draw an example of a case, for example, not describing any individual or person or place, but in case of a person who married and he has more than one wife in a situation. The Quran describes how that wealth should be shared even amongst the wives. But in a state, as a secular state and secular law, there's a difference. And what is that difference? The difference here is that under secular law, we see that a woman can go to the court as being the legal wife. That is, meaning the first wife, as the case may be, or the second wife, or whichever of the wives that he has as a legal wife, would be the one who can entitle, and the other ones would not be considered in any way valid to inherit anything whatsoever. So the question we ask ourselves is that there are situations like this, that they would go to the courts and demand their rights as having full control over the estate, as opposed to anyone else coming to that relationship. The question the sisters should have in mind, and this is not to bring down any sister, but we have to understand the rights of the deen, and we cannot just say, well, condemn our husband or condemn what he has done and say, well, this is not part of what I wanted, and out of jealousy or whatever the case would be of what has happened, why he do that for, whatever it is. This is not the situation here. What is to be considered here at this point in time is that we are going to stand before Allah on the day of judgment. We are going to stand before Allah on the day of judgment. And therefore, what we are to receive is what we should actually receive, because on the day of judgment, the ayat of Quran tells us, and we are told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, and it says to us that Inna alladhina ya'kuluna, certainly those, Inna alladhina ya'kula riba, that those who ya'kuluna amwala, al-yatama, who consumes the wealth of the orphan, dhulman, out of oppression, oppressiveness, without them having right towards it. Innama ya'kuluna fi butuniha naron, is as though like they are eating fire and filling their stomachs with fire. وَيُصَلُّونَ سَعِيرًا, and وَيُصَلُّونَ سَعِيرًا, and in this condition they shall be what? Tormented by it and face the severe blazing fire of it. يُصَلُّونَ سَعِيرًا, they shall face the blazing fire. Now, this ayat of Quran is telling us clearly, and it's not just for sisters alone, this is also for all who have a right to inheritance, and those who deprive others of their right towards inheritance from what is placed under the principles of distribution, and who are preferable over others according to the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That we ought to recognize that there is some level of distinction, and there's a level of how wealth should be distributed, and never within our own whims and fancies and our own emotions should get the better of us and tell ourselves, I will take this matter further. He should have done better for me, knowing that I is his wife, I bear all of his children, and now he wants me to go and share this with all other women that he had on the outside, and that kind of talk. You know, in our Western society, this is sometimes how some women behave. I'm not saying this to offend any sisters here, just bear this in mind. It's just a matter of our consciousness before Allah and what our duty should be before Allah, irrespective of what our husband would have probably done. That's him and his Allah's dealing afterwards. But we want to be fair that when we stand on the day of judgment, that we don't get caught up into the mess or into the situation that we have to account or be held amongst the people who we consider to be amongst the dhulman, the dhalimin, the ones who are the oppressors. And that is a serious situation that we don't want to find ourselves in. Now, we are continuing looking a little more into the history of, for example, as you mentioned about the women of India and their relationship of wealth, and they're not having the right to earn until the year 2005, and that is not far away from what we are right now, just 15 years ago. And 15 years ago, this is when they have now been given a privilege by an act in the parliament and the government of that present time to actually allow them this privilege to have right to inheritance. Now, in other parts of the world, that in the Islamic world, I would say, well, whatever is called Islamic world today, wherever the Islamic laws are prepared, they are guided by the Islamic laws of inheritance, and therefore women are treated with a level of right. And if ever they are deprived of it, the Quran warns us that anyone who were to take away the rights or oppress any one of them in oppression and dhulman, then they have an accountability before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when it comes to that, even under Roman law, Roman law, the European Roman law, a woman inheritance was passed on to her husband. Even under the Roman laws, it would have passed on to her husband. And even in the United States of America, we know that these laws and the rights of women is one of the biggest things that we hear from this part of the world, North America, is that even then, until the year 1850, women were not treated equally. Up to the year 1850, then they were now being given and offered privileges to rights of legal ownership of property and these types of things. And inheritance was on that challenge for some upward time until the 19th century, you would say, when they were actually given the privilege to actually become particularly owners based on laws of secular systems that were set forward, which is not long ago. We're talking about just 100 plus years ago, before these things come into what? Existence for the rights of women. So even when you watch the world today, and we are thinking about, how they look towards Islam and they look towards the laws of how Islam deals with women. When we look at it, amongst admittedly amongst the Western world, what they would have said then and now is that they acknowledge the fact that Islam had actually way ahead when it comes to the rights of women in dealing in finances, in dealing with them in relationship towards them having ownership towards property, and they're dealing towards business. Women in the whole were given a far and superior position amongst the Muslims. And this is not about boasting about Islam and what is Islam about, but the fact is that this is what Allah, who had created us, has prescribed for us and for our families, and in particular towards our women. So at no point in time should we ever, as male, try in any way to belittle or to bring down the honor and the izzat that Allah has given to women. And women should never feel in the proportions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prepared in the Quran and what the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said in relationship to inheritance towards women, that they are still being slighted or feeling that they are not given their due value. But note, when we're going to discuss further and read the notes, you would see and we'll come to an understanding of why it is that a woman has a greater benefit in Islam when it comes to financing and ownership of property and otherwise. So we have mentioned about them. We know about the Europeans, that even in their culture, the eldest male were always the ones to inherit, never were the women, even in their time until recent, as I mentioned, in their relationship. The people of Africa as well, the African continent, in their tribal relationships towards inheritance, the tribal and their behavior towards human rights and violations of what they have done towards women as well. A woman cannot inherit if she does not want to be inherited. So there is a situation that when a man dies, she becomes the inherited product. In other words, she's considered to be part parcel of that ownership of the husband as a wealth. In other words, she doesn't have a privilege of freedom, but she becomes something like a property that is handed over to the family and of of her husband. So in such a situation, it becomes very scary in history that the only way that she can only come out of that is that she can leave that relationship, walk away from it, and then she stands to gain nothing or to be in the environment where what she could have enjoyed from what her husband have left. In other words, the only time that this woman who still becomes ownership towards her male families now can only benefit out of her wealth that is produced by her husband or left by her husband. Such wealth can only be enjoyed by her if she stays within that family. In other words, Islam does not teach us that. Islam teaches us and tells us that a woman, if her husband dies, she has an iddat, a duration of time that she has to wait until, and reason being that she might be pregnant, it could be any other situations could have probably been around, and time for mourning or whatever Allah has given an iddat period for the benefit of this woman. After that iddat, she has a choice. She can move on with her relationship. She receives her wealth and she moves on. She can remarry. She can do whatever she chooses to do by that privilege given to her. And this is what Islam has provided as a means of benefit and a means of reward and rights towards a woman. And we must acknowledge this and never feel that we should control a woman based on the fact that she married into my family and then now she want to she want to hold on to this, and this doesn't really belong to her, or it really belong to my family, and now she want to come and claim this or claim that. No, it's not like that. And she can't move out of here because if she's going to move and she's going to carry these things, it's going to affect our family. Thinking like these are not part of our deen. They may be part of a tradition, a custom, or some type of behavior, but not part of our Islam when it comes to inheritance. So even in those African continents, before laws of the secular nature try to give rights, till to today, even in South Africa, there are still challenges towards women and parts of Africa for women in their rights to ownership. And as far as Muslims are concerned, and we should be more particular, as I mentioned, we don't want to be considered amongst the Dhalimun, the ones who are considered to be amongst the oppressors. And therefore, that type of thinking, that type of a behavior is not welcome in our deen and in our practices whatsoever. Remember, if we are really the true lovers of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was really pinnacle and the shining lamp of the Quran, then therefore our practice of our deen should be in the exact example that was set by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When it comes towards women and the treating of women, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Wa ana khairu min ahlihi wa nisaihi," and I am the best towards my woman, towards his women, and towards his wives. This tells us, my dear brothers and my dear sisters, what is important for us to understand here is that Islam, as opposed to many of the other laws set by the Western world and of history amongst the nature and background of so many societies around us, we must note that our Islam and our practicing of Islam has given rise to the benefit of women. Now, following in our notes, let's take a few pointers from our notes. Males and females have equal rights in inheritance. Upon the death of a Muslim, if his heir includes also the females, then males and females heirs inherit the properties simultaneously, meaning that they all have an entitlement towards their property that was left behind by their parent, as the case would be it a parent, as the case would be. Males have no preferential rights of inheritance over the females, and preferential rights means in any aspect of the asset or what is left behind. It must be understood that that which is left behind is to be shared amongst males and females, and never, well, I the son and I'm entitled to the house and you are the daughter, well, I could give you some cash and we could settle it like that. No, there must be some level of agreement on how it should be distributed, and nothing is wrong if that is what you want to do. If you want to leave your brother with the house and his sister want to get the cash, I have no problem with whatever way you want, but there must be an agreement as how the residue, what is left behind, must be shared according to the Islamic law. Now, in other words, although there is no difference between male and female heir in so far as their respective rights of inheritance is concerned, but generally the quantum of property inherited by female heir is half of the property given to a male of equal status or degree. Now, this is where it's found to be, why he should get double my amount, why we should give him more and I get less, and this is quite challenging for a sister, and sometimes, in a relationship with brothers and sisters, sometimes the sisters, subhanallah, sometimes the sisters in a home, the daughters, as we would say, do more in relationship towards their parents' khidmat, their service towards their parents, looking after them in their old age. Sometimes the daughters take a higher precedent in that relationship and give more of their time towards their parents. And when it comes to inheritance now, the son who was probably nowhere around at a certain point in time comes to say, well, I have to get twice the amount as you. And, that sounds very difficult because the sisters or the women will say, well, you never was wrong, but you want to get more than me. You never do nothing for them. And that is where shaitan comes into play, because it is not about our nafs or our desires or what our rights we feel we have. Whatever khidmat or service that you, the individual, as children would have done for your parents, be it male or be it female, be it a daughter, we have to understand that it's not you earning their wealth because of what you have done for them. You did not go there for that purpose. You did not do the khidmat or the service of your parents for the mere reason that you want to become one that has the right to entitlement of wealth because of what you have done for your parents. The fact is that we must remember that the Prophet ﷺ said to us that paradise lies beneath the feet of your parent, your mother. And then it mentioned of who should look more for and preference to than your mother, than your father. But your father is also of that equal right in terms of khidmat and service. So therefore, we should understand very clearly our service towards them was not to get their wealth. Our service towards them was to gain paradise, to earn the mercy of Allah, to earn the rewards of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is our duty towards our parents. Our duty was to do their khidmat, not in exchange for whatever they have left in terms of wealth, but Allah has given or proportionate the wealth towards the children, knowing that they also have a khidmat and a duty towards their parent and to serve their parents. But that is not the reason that Allah has placed the wealth there, but Allah has placed the wealth there because they are deserving of it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says your duty as children towards your parent is that you have a right towards them and they are deserving of your service towards them. The parents are deserving of your service, meaning that you have to help, you have to assist them, you have to give them their due rights in terms of fulfilling their basic needs, their food, their shelter, their clothing, their basic needs must be fulfilled by us when the time comes on, meaning we don't necessarily take away from their wealth, even though we can spend from their wealth in looking after them, all well and good. It's not that we should take a salary from them to benefit us, not unless the parents themselves say, no, hold on to this because you could be working and earning your wealth, but you take your time out from your jobs or whatever it is to look after me and you're not earning an income. I can give you something, and nothing is wrong with that if a parent wants to give their children in any proportion at that point in time. But however, they should not overlook the fact that they have other children, despite the fact that these other children may not be doing any sort of service for them. All right, so whether the children do a service or not, it is rightful that we should try to fulfill and give to our children their due rights according to the Islamic law in distribution, and in particular our daughters. And even if our daughters are not there and our children and our sons and their wives are probably looking after us, don't leave out your daughters irrespective of what, because it's not us to leave them out, but the Quran is telling us that we should fulfill an obligation towards them. However, we're looking at the proportion of that they're not equal, whereas it's a 2-to-1 ratio. The sister gets 1 as the brother will get 2. That's what the sister would receive. Now, the principle that normally the share of a male is double the share of a female has some justification. And this is not that I justifying it, but commentators of Quran and scholars of Deen looked at the matter and looked at maybe these may be comforting words, but not to state that this is the actual fact that of what the fact is that what the Quran state is the fact. We can't change that, we can't move away from that. So under Muslim law, Islamic law, while a female heir gets or hopes to get in the future an additional money or property as her meher, because this is what a female is entitled to, while a female gets or hopes to get in the future, meaning that she gets married or whatever the case would be, the money, in additional money to the property of the inheritance that she already entitled to. In other words, the brother was 2-to-1. In other words, it was mentioned here that the shares is doubled that of the female. Now, a male does not get meher. All right, a male, he does not get the meher, and he does not get maintenance. Men don't get maintenance. Men have no choice but to maintain women. In other words, a woman who works or a woman who has her wealth, she does not have to spend that wealth to look after her family. Whenever she does that, she does it out of khair and goodness, and she should be rewarded for it. In other words, she gets a double reward because one, she's doing khidmat for herself and her husband and her family. And that means she's spending her wealth to their benefit. And there are many sisters in our society today, many women today in our society, they look after their males, they look after their husband, they look after their children, they spend on their children, they spend on their husbands. And that is a commendable act, right? They don't have to do that, but they do that to ensure that they have happiness in their homes. And sometimes we overlook that as males, and we overlook the kind contributions that is made by our females, our wives. Sometimes our daughters might be working, sometimes sister might be working and helping the family out. A wife does this as well, and we overlook these things and try to pressure them and get them to do more than what they're doing already. And we don't help out around the house, and we don't do things around to benefit our sisters at the point of effort that they are also making. Noted fully well that they are doing a job on the outside and also coming to do a job on the inside. And we should appreciate that they are helping out in the house and out of the house, meaning earning, and they have become earners of wealth. And therefore, we should bear in mind that our sisters are doing human service towards their family, and acknowledge and appreciate it and be grateful for that, what they are doing. And therefore, sisters, your job is very, very tremendous, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows your effort. And this wasn't just something happened now. We looked at the time of Ayub. Ayub, subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put him through a tremendous test until the point came that another test, subhanallah, another test, he was given a tremendous test that he could not even work. And in that situation, when he could not work, in that situation, the right and the benefit here, looking at it as we are saying, that individual, his wife went out and collected firewood and tried to acquire some means of getting food towards him. Subhanallah, that in itself tells us, that women have a tremendous job and a benefit to get, even looking after their husband if the husband becomes sick, all these things. But yet, this distribution that they receive, they should never think to themselves that they are being slighted. No, Allah allows them to enjoy the mahar, the right of the dowry, and a dowry must be paid to the woman, and it's her right to own that, and no one should take it away from her. She could decide how she wants to spend it or what she wants to do with it. It's her property. As well as the husband has a right to look after her needs and take care of her and keep her with the best of comfort that he can afford to and provide for her. And that is part of where we look at when it comes to a husband and a wife relationship, that he has to spend his wealth and she doesn't have to. But as I said, the khair and the goodness of sisters today, subhanAllah, far supersedes that of many people of the past. And even now, many pious and righteous women who work, they still look to themselves. And there's also cases where women work and they see their husband suffering and they really leave them with that pressure too. So we don't want to be amongst those type of people. They have, but it's amazing sometimes you see that situation where they have a right towards wealth, but they actually hold it back and keep it to themselves and see their husbands suffer, as I would say. I would use that kind of word, but that's the reality of what the situation is at times. Now, if we were to ask ourselves, as we go along in the notes here, that we look at, for instance, what is mentioned again primarily that in relationship to the notes, it says here that the female as well, that after the mahar, and the male heir is primarily liable for the maintenance of his children, whereas the female heir may have this liability only in an extraordinary case. All right. So understanding this is of importance for us moving forward. In other words, taking care of our rights. And we know that the Quran tells us that, and the ayat that you're seeing here, لِلْرِجَالِ نَصِيبٌ, for men is a share, مِمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ, from what for his children, whereas for the woman, وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ وَالْنِسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ, and for a female heir, as well, for a woman is a share of what the parents and close relatives leave, be it little or much, an obligatory share is for that woman. So the Quran makes it very clear in Surah An-Nisa, verse number 7, Surah 4, verse 7. That indicates to us that the injunction is that we cannot slant the Quran or try to find a smart way out for ourselves. No, we can't, because what is mentioned here is very clear for us to actually put ourselves in a gear and let ourselves know that no, women is placed in the Quran, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that they are very much deserving of a share as Allah dictates what that share should be. And as I said, sisters, in case of her wife, there's a different proportion of her wealth that a wife should receive, as in the case being a quarter when there's no children around, or 1/8 as the standard share, or the mother in a case where she receives from the estate of her children, be it a 1/6 share, or the father of that child could also get a quarter of the share. And we'll describe those shares as we go along, but we are discussing right now just basically the state of women and their right to inheritance. And thus far, we have come to understand that a woman has been given that right to inherit from the Quran. Now, a child in the womb of the mother, and this is also important, the woman, she is pregnant, husband died, that's why she has a period of what? Iddat. Now, during the Iddat period, now the baby is conceived. Now she has to wait the duration of the period of the delivery of this child. Why? Because there's a determination of be it male or female before the wealth can actually be distributed. So there are other people in line who are also waiting for their portion of wealth, apart from the wife, the child in the belly, the womb of the woman, as well as probably the father, the mother, probably other children that may be present. All of them now have to be at bay or appropriate a portion of wealth for this child, should this child born and born alive is also due to inheritance and entitled to receive, be it male or female, then that portion must be assorted and given to this child. So even in the womb, the woman has a share, and the child in her womb also has a share. And that is very clear for us to understand, that we're saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even amongst the provisions that is provided in the world, Allah provides for even that child. And it tells us of the legitimacy of a child in the womb. Once it already has formation and fetus status, that child comes out into the world alive, that child benefits. And we should never take for granted, that we talk about abortion and those types of things. Islam don't really allow abortion except under valid circumstances, be it a woman was raped or otherwise. Then there are certain circumstances like that for the allowance, or be it for detrimental to her life. In a case, then certain allowances will be given, but that cannot be taken into consideration without discussion from a learned mufti or scholar that has that level of understanding, as well as the doctors who would prescribe what is required in a circumstance like that, and then such a matter can be taken care of. However, a child is considered as a valid heir, one entitled to receive inheritance, as that child may be in the womb of the mother. That child has a right to inheritance. Now, a child in the womb, as is mentioned here in the notes, a child in the womb of the mother is competent to inherit provided it is born alive. A child in embryo is regarded as a living person, and as such, the property vests immediately in that child. But if such a child in the womb is not born alive, then the share already vested in it is divested, and it is presumed as if there was no such heir in the womb. So the child born, stillborn, meaning the child didn't come out alive, And in such a case, that child will not be a child as a living fetus would be, but in this case, there's no inheritance for this assigned to this individual. If this child, however, comes out and lives for one day, one moment, 1 hour, 1 minute, then the allotted share must be given to the child. Janaza is done, and whatever that share would have been should now be reintroduced and distributed to who is entitled to receive from the child in that instance. So understand something very clearly. You know, when we buy things for our children, and I had mentioned this on that topic I was doing on Islam and Muslims in the modern world and choices, I was talking about, you know, that whatever we give our children, you know, we say we'll take it back, and I know yours, and I'm minding you, I'm taking care of you. It might be right, but whenever you buy something and you give it to your children, you are no longer the owner of those things. You understand? It becomes part of their inheritance. You give your children money, you give them a savings, you know, that is theirs. You can't just go back and take it. All that is because if they were to die at any point in time, it is what you have to inherit from, or whatever their siblings or whoever that as entitled heirs or inheritors will have to take from this individual. So we just cannot take away something from someone, you know, our children, and say, well, I gain that again. Once you give them it, you know, you can't take back something, you know, there's a saying, you get a kettle boil in your eye, but I ain't talking about that. I'm just telling you from the perspective of an Islamic view. What is important is that when whatever a child is given is really owned by that child, and we have no right of jurisdiction in taking it back. If you see you're lending your child something, it's a different story, you lend. But if you're giving your child, you're giving, that's mean ownership, tamlik, handing over something, which is different. So therefore, in consideration of that, we must understand that a child born, a child entitles, the child dies after the child born, then that what is entitled to the child now will be left for inheritance amongst those who are entitled according to the Quran. In other words, a child cannot make the decision, nor the parent cannot take away the father or the mother who had died, that share that child was entitled to. In this case, the mother who was alive cannot take away the child's share and say, well, that's my child, and whatever he had to get is mine. No, that can also, how the child can maintain itself? No. No, the responsibility of the maintenance of the child still becomes the responsibility of the mother in this instant, and looking after them and taking care of them. And there are instances in the life of the Sahabiya, of the companions of the women of the time Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and their situations when they would have had women who have been widowed and they had children to look after, and this had been situations like that, that they look after their children despite of that situation, and they grew them up without remarrying in some instances as well. So bearing that in mind, you know that in Islam it makes very clear certain circumstances that we should look after and be careful and minded about, that whatever is even in the womb of the child, the mother, and the child comes out and comes alive, that belongs to the child grows up and entitled to receive from it. What we might want to look at is, you know, that in cases of inheritance in our Western society, a child coming into the world, sometimes we tell ourselves, you know, that we put a date of maturity, then the child will now become what? Rightful heir to the estate of what was left behind. That's according to what Western culture and practices. But a child receives whatever he or she has on the date that child comes into this world. It is their ownership. However, the management of whatever assets may be left may be required to be done by someone who may be a relative, be it the mother in this instant, or be it an elder brother or a sister, as the case would be, which to manage the affair and do not take advantage in dhulman, oppressing, or taking away from this orphan child, who might be their brother or their little baby sister, or the case would be, and taking away their right. No, it can't happen so. It has to be managed, and whatever is gained from it must be given to that child as their profit out of what they have actually given to them by their father in this instant, all right, or their relative who they have received their inheritance from. So we are very clear on this, and I hope that we bear that in mind, that how much Islam recognized and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has recognized even a baby, a child. So when we see the world today and we see how many children are orphaned all over India and all over different parts of the world, they are suffering, right? And their rights have been taken away from them. And so many child labor in different parts of the world, we ask ourselves, really, does the world, this modern world and this fancy world, have solutions to the problems as Islam put forward these practices. If only we as Muslims really put forward the practice according to even what the inheritance is telling us here in relationship towards children. Now note, but, question here before us again is, but if such a child in the womb is not born alive, the share is already vested and it is divested and it is presumed as if there were no such heir in the womb at all. And in this case, the primogeniture is a principle of inheritance under which the eldest son of the deceased enjoys certain special privileges. And this is something that Islam does not hold to or bound to. All right, now I'll leave a few room for questions, and inshallah we'll close in the next 5 minutes. I just want to see if there's any questions on the chat. And a housewife also does service, we see this question or the comment that is made that, when we're speaking about the wife, being a breadwinner and fulfilling a service as a housewife, sorry, and I don't understand the question or the comment that, the breadwinner or the woman who does not do any type of work to earn an income, but she's a housewife, there's a factor that must also be understood here. And when I was discussing this topic on our topic of marriage and wife and family relationship, I was saying a wife who's what we term in our Western society as a homemaker, she may not be earning an income, and therefore we tell ourselves she's just home doing nothing. No. And the sister, whoever post that comment, said that they're doing some service at home. And as I say, that is a very, very, very dedicated service. And if we have to pay someone to do that job, sometimes what we are working for may not be able to probably pay for such a service that is done by our wives in our homes, looking after our food, our clothes, our children, and caring of the home and all the different things of the house and the chores and all these things. Sometimes they do so many things that we cannot even look after, running after the errands and the bills and looking after this and the education of the children and so much things. It is recommended that our male, in discussions with many situations I've dealt with in terms of counseling and marriages and so on, some men don't even give their women folk some level of stipend or some level of money as personal money, and they should do that, not as a means of saying, I'm paying you for doing work in the house, but they should give their women some level of entitlement. I know some men in our traditional ways and custom would just hand over the entire salary to the wife and let them manage and budget the home. And whether that is something that is kind or good is also something that is to be debated as well, because the men also need to have a personal amount for themselves. So they just give everything to the house. However, it's a big sacrifice. If they want to do that, they can. All right. So in both instances, we recognize that a sister who does that service for her husband and her children and the home altogether is well valid and beneficial to that home. So at this point in time, I want you all to bear some questions in mind, right? I want you all to take a few questions just before we close off in a couple of minutes time, inshallah. I'm not going to say that you're going to answer the questions now. I'm going to run through some of these things in your mind and through your notes so you can have an idea of what we are looking for when it comes to answering a few of the questions, inshallah. All right. So amongst the questions I want to ask, and you know how to answer it now, you can bear it in mind. I'll post it up next week, inshallah. An Islamic will, what is the Islamic word for will? All right, what is the Islamic word for a will? And remember, a will is referring to the 1/3 portion of our wealth, of our estate that we distribute to charitable organization or causes in our time and other situations as such to benefit us in Sadaqatul Jariyah. So what is the word for that will? Bear it in mind, we're going to get that said now. We prepare a will because it is Allah's wealth, or Allah commands us to do so, or to ensure the right person gets it, or all of the above. Take that in mind. I give you the last one before we close, inshallah. Under Islamic law, a Muslim can only distribute 1/3, 2/3, a quarter, an eighth of his wealth to charities and people of your choice that will benefit you in the next life. So what portion? Is it a third, 2/3, a quarter, 1/8 of his wealth, or how wealth as the case would be? So those are three little questions I'm asking you to bear in mind, and I'm not going to look for the answer tonight, but inshallah in our next session, we're going to spend a little time to share with the knowledge of what we have gained thus far, inshallah. I say jazakallah for everybody for joining in and being part of the program again in our class, and inshallah, I would look forward to see us encouraging others to be part of the program and the classes, inshallah, as we know that this is very important and we should share the value of this session and the sessions that we have done so far on inheritance and encourage others to join in. I mean, we might be at home, we might know family members and friends who might be interested. Let's share the word out there, send them a little WhatsApp and give them a little in tune. Remember, these classes are also on YouTube. You can get the recording if you have missed any of the things that you want to hear, or you want to hear a repeated class. You can go on to Zoom and you can receive the full class there, inshallah. So when we look at it, inshallah, on our next session, we'll continue at this point. I say jazakallah and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.